I thought grief would make me invisible. But in America, even a widow doesn't get the chance to vanish quietly, especially not when her dead husband was a doctor who knew too much. The morning after Daniel's funeral, I found a black car parked across the street from my house. Windows tinted, engine running, no one stepping out. Just waiting, watching. I didn't have to guess long. He had warned me, hadn't he? He had whispered late at night when he thought I was asleep that if something ever happened to him, I needed to run. But where do you run when you've already lost everything? I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the kitchen window, my palms shaking around a coffee mug I couldn't drink from. The house felt like a museum of a life. I no longer had the stethoscope hanging on the hook by the door, his half-read medical journals on the couch, the faint trace of his cologne still clinging to our bed sheets. Daniel was gone, and yet somehow his death wasn't the ending. It was the beginning of something darker. That was when I heard the knock. Soft, quick, urgent. I froze. Then his voice low, familiar. "It's me. Please, open up." Ethan, the assistant from my lawyer's office. The quiet, almost invisible man who had been there in the background during the estate meetings. His presence steady and unassuming. He was too young to carry the weight he carried in his gaze. Too attentive, too careful, like someone who had been watching me longer than I realized. I opened the door and there he was, disheveled, eyes wild, his tie askew like he had run all the way from downtown. "They're coming for you," he said, breathless. "We don't have time." I blinked at him. "What are you talking about?" "The car. Across the street. You think it's the hospital board or the press?" "No, they're not here for condolences. They're here because of what your husband knew. And now they think you know it too." The words hit me harder than the funeral had. I shook my head, clutching the frame of the door like it could keep me grounded. Daniel didn't tell me anything." Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Doesn't matter. They won't risk it. You're a liability now." He reached into his coat and pulled out a set of car keys. "Pack a bag. We have to go." I stared at him. This boy, this assistant who always sat 2 chairs away from me in the lawyer's office, quietly taking notes, was now telling me to abandon everything I had left. But the black car outside didn't move. It just idled, its presence louder than any siren. And in that silence I understood. I didn't have a choice. We drove through the back roads, Ethan gripping the wheel with a tension I hadn't seen in him before. His jaw was tight, his eyes scanning every mirror. For the first hour I couldn't speak. The road stretched endless, flanked by autumn trees, and all I could think of was Daniel. Then Ethan broke the silence. "He didn't deserve this." My head turned sharply. "You knew him?" He hesitated. "I knew. Enough." "What does that mean?" His hands flexed on the wheel. "It means I knew the kind of man he was, the kind of risks he took, and I knew what it would cost him." Something cracked in his voice, but when I looked, his expression was unreadable. I wanted to ask more, but my throat felt dry. Instead, I pressed against the window, watching the blur of leaves. The reality of it hit me. We weren't just driving. We were fleeing. Hours later, when the sun began to dip, painting the highway in shades of gold and crimson, Ethan pulled into an abandoned gas station. He killed the engine, his chest heaving like he'd been holding his breath the whole way. "You should eat," he said, handing me a pack of crackers he pulled from the glove box. His tone was casual, but his eyes lingered on me too long, as if checking I was still real. I managed a weak laugh. "You planned this." "Not this," he admitted. "But I've been preparing, just in case." The way he said it, like he had always known this moment would come, unnerved me. "Why?" I whispered. He didn't look at me when he answered. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of losing you too." The words landed between us, heavy, undeniable. My chest tightened, confusion twisting with something I didn't want to name. I searched his face, but he finally turned, and in his eyes was an honesty I wasn't ready for. A longing so raw it scared me. The assistant who had hovered silently in the corner of conference rooms was suddenly someone else entirely. Someone who had been watching me not out of duty, but out of love. and I realized with a pang that maybe Daniel hadn't been the only one keeping secrets. That night, we found a cheap motel off the interstate. Ethan paid cash, kept his head down. Inside the small room, with its flickering neon light seeping through the blinds, the silence grew unbearable. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands. "You should tell me everything," I said finally. Ethan leaned against the door, arms crossed. "Everything would take too long. And honestly, I don't know all of it. What I do know is that your husband was working on cases tied to pharmaceutical fraud, dangerous ones. He was a whistleblower, and they wanted to shut him up. And now they think you're holding the files." I shook my head, tears stinging. "I don't even know where to start looking good." Ethan cut me off, his tone fierce. "Because that means you can't give them what they want. That's what will keep you alive." I looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment the fear that had gripped me since Daniel's death shifted into something else. Because here was this man, this assistant I had barely noticed, who was now the only person standing between me and the abyss. And I didn't know if I could survive losing him too. The motel walls were thin. Outside, trucks rumbled down the highway, carrying lives that weren't mine. I lay awake on the bed, listening to the steady sound of Ethan's breathing from the chair by the window. He had insisted on taking the chair, claiming he'd keep watch. But sometime after midnight, I whispered into the dark, "Why are you doing this for me?" The silence stretched, and I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, softly, "Because I love you." The words shattered the night. I turned my head, staring at his silhouette against the faint glow of neon. My pulse hammered in my throat. "Ethan, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted quickly. "I know you're grieving. I know you don't see me that way. But I couldn't keep pretending anymore. Not when I might lose you." His voice broke then, rough with vulnerability, and I realized he had been carrying this weight for far longer than I had known him. I closed my eyes, the ache in my chest unbearable. My husband was gone. My life was in ruins. And yet, in this fragile, impossible moment, someone was telling me I wasn't alone. And for the first time since Daniel's death, I let myself believe it might be true. Morning broke gray and heavy, like the sky itself knew we were running out of time. I woke to the sound of Ethan rustling through a duffel bag. His hair was damp, his shirt clinging to his back, and he looked like a soldier preparing for battle, not the shy assistant I once knew. "You didn't sleep?" I said, my voice rough with exhaustion. He glanced at me, a flicker of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't want to risk it. You should eat something before we move." I sat up slowly, my body aching from a bed that smelled like mold and bleach. The world felt unreal, like I was stuck inside a life that didn't belong to me. "Move where?" Ethan zipped the bag shut. "West. Smaller towns. Places where no one asks questions." "And then what?" My voice cracked. "We just keep driving until we disappear?" He paused, looking at me as though searching for an answer he couldn't say out loud. Finally, he muttered, "If that's what it takes to keep you alive, then yes." The weight of his words pressed against me. I wanted to argue, to scream that this wasn't living, it was just hiding, but then I remembered the car outside my house, the shadows at the edge of every street. Whoever they were, they weren't going to stop. I swallowed hard. "Okay, let's go." The next hours blurred together in long stretches of asphalt, faded diners, and gas stations with flickering neon signs. Ethan kept the car steady, his eyes on the horizon, his knuckles white around the wheel. I sat in silence, watching the world slip by. Every so often, I caught him glancing at me, quick, almost guilty, like he was afraid I'd notice how much he cared. At a rest stop in Missouri, we sat on a picnic bench, sharing a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. The air smelled of diesel and pine. Trucks rumbled in and out, their drivers strangers whose lives seemed untouched by the chaos swallowing mine. I watched Ethan carefully unwrap his half, his fingers steady despite the tension rolling off him. Finally, I asked the question I had been holding back. "When did you know?" He froze, eyes flicking to mine. "Know what?" "That you felt this way about me." His throat bobbed. For a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, quietly, the first time you walked into the office, you looked lost, like the world was too heavy for one person to carry. And yet, you carried it anyway. I stared at him, stunned. That was years ago. I know. His voice was raw, filled with the kind of honesty people usually keep buried. I tried to ignore it. You were married. You were untouchable. But every time you came in, every time you sat across from me with that tired smile, I couldn't stop. The confession cut through me like glass. My chest ached with grief, confusion, and something dangerously close to longing. I wanted to tell him it wasn't fair, that I was still drowning in Daniel's memory. But when Ethan looked at me, his gaze steady, unashamed, I couldn't breathe, because part of me wanted to lean into that gaze, to believe in it. By nightfall, we reached a small town tucked between endless fields of corn and silence. Ethan chose a motel off the main road, its sign buzzing weakly in the dark. Inside, the room was warmer than the last two narrow beds. A broken lamp, faded wallpaper peeling at the corners. I dropped onto one bed, burying my face in my hands. I don't know how long I can do this, I admitted. Ethan sat on the edge of the other bed, elbows on his knees. You don't have to. We'll figure something out. I lifted my head. How can you be so sure? His eyes softened. Because I've made it this far with you, and I'm not letting go now. Something in his tone steady, unwavering, made my chest tighten. I wanted to hate him for being my only anchor. Instead, I felt myself pulled toward him like gravity. We sat in silence for a long time, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. And then the silence shattered. A knock, sharp, heavy. Both of us froze. Ethan's hand went to his bag immediately, pulling out a small handgun I hadn't known he carried. He pressed a finger to his lips, signaling me to stay quiet. The knock came again, louder this time. Room 12. A voice barked outside. Male. Rough. Open up. My blood turned to ice. Ethan moved silently to the door, peering through the peephole. His face tightened. He mouthed one word. 2. I clutched the bed frame, my pulse thundering. Whoever they were, they had found us. Ethan stepped back, gun in hand, breathing shallow. The knock came again, followed by a curse. And then silence. Minutes dragged by, thick and suffocating. Finally, tires screeched outside, fading into the distance. Only then did Ethan lower the gun, his shoulders sagging with relief. I exhaled shakily. They know we're here. He nodded grimly. We have to move again. Tonight. My body screamed with exhaustion, but the fear was stronger. We threw everything back into the duffel, leaving the motel behind as if we'd never been there. We drove until dawn, the road endless and merciless. My eyelids grew heavy, but adrenaline kept me awake. Finally, somewhere in Kansas, Ethan pulled onto a dirt path that led to a small, abandoned barn. We'll rest here, he said. Inside, the barn smelled of hay and dust. Moonlight spilled through cracks in the wood, painting stripes across the floor. Ethan spread his jacket on the ground, motioning for me to sit. I sank down, my body trembling with exhaustion. Do you think we'll make it out of this? I whispered. Ethan crouched beside me, his face close, his expression unreadable. I don't know, but I'll die before I let them touch you. The intensity in his voice stole my breath. I looked at him, really looked, and realized that beneath the quiet assistant exterior was a man who had chosen me again and again, even when it meant risking everything. My throat tightened. Ethan. Before I could stop myself, I reached out, my fingers brushing his hand. He froze, his eyes searching mine, desperate and afraid. And in that fragile space, with danger pressing in from all sides, the truth hung between us. I wasn't ready to love again, but I also wasn't ready to let him go. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the barn slats. I woke to find Ethan still awake, watching the fields with weary eyes. His hair was tousled, his face drawn, but he looked almost peaceful with the light touching him. Did you sleep at all? I asked softly. He shook his head. Didn't want to risk it. You can't keep carrying this alone, I murmured. He turned to me, and for the first time his expression cracked. Vulnerability bled through. I don't know how to do anything else. Not when it comes to you. The words broke something inside me. I leaned closer, resting my forehead against his shoulder. He stiffened at first, then slowly relaxed, his hand hesitantly finding mine. Our fingers laced together, trembling. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even a promise. It was survival, two broken men clinging to each other in the middle of nowhere, daring to believe they weren't completely lost. For the first time since Daniel's death, I let myself breathe. The barn became our sanctuary for less than 12 hours before reality crept back in. I thought the silence of the fields, the wide-open horizon, might buy us time, but Ethan never relaxed. He paced in measured steps, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on every sound the wind carried. When I finally stood and touched his arm, he startled, nearly reaching for the gun tucked at his waist. "You're going to burn yourself out," I whispered. His gaze softened when he saw me. "Better me than you." The way he said it made my chest ache. I wanted to tell him he wasn't just a shield for me, that he wasn't disposable, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I picked up the duffel bag. "Then let's go before they find us." We left the barn behind at dawn. By late afternoon, we rolled into a small town off Highway 50. It was the kind of place that looked untouched by time-weathered brick buildings, an old diner with a homemade pie sign, children on bicycles riding down cracked sidewalks. Normalcy. The kind of normalcy that mocked us. Ethan parked on a side street, his shoulders tense. "We'll stop long enough to eat and clean up. We can't draw attention." Inside the diner, the air smelled of bacon grease and coffee. A waitress with tired eyes led us to a booth near the back. I sank into the vinyl seat, the hum of conversation around us strangely comforting. For a moment, I almost felt invisible again. Ethan sat across from me, scanning the room like a man waiting for a bullet. I leaned in. "You're making people stare more by acting like a fugitive." His mouth twitched in the ghost of a smile. "That's because I am one." I shook my head, trying to hide the way my lips wanted to curve. But before I could reply, the waitress returned with 2 mugs of coffee and menus. Ethan waited until she walked away before lowering his voice. "I need to tell you something." The words sent a chill through me. "What is it?" He hesitated, then leaned forward. Daniel didn't just stumble into this mess. He knew exactly what he was risking. I gripped the mug, my stomach tightening. "What do you mean?" Ethan's eyes flicked around the diner, then back to me. "Your husband came to my boss 6 months ago. He said he had evidence, documents, recordings, names. He didn't trust the hospital, the board, or even the police. He was ready to blow the whistle, but he was buying time. He wanted to protect you." My breath caught. "Evidence?" Ethan nodded. "But it's gone. At least I don't know where it is. And that's why they're after you. They think you know." I stared down at the steam curling from my coffee. My husband, the man I thought I knew better than anyone, had carried a secret that could kill him. That had killed him. And now it might kill me. The weight of betrayal and love twisted inside me until I couldn't tell them apart. Ethan reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. "I swear to you I'll find the truth. I'll get you out of this." The heat of his touch startled me more than his promise. For a heartbeat too long, I didn't pull away. And that was when I noticed a man by the counter. He wasn't eating. He wasn't reading the paper like the others. He was watching us. I stiffened. Ethan noticed instantly, his hand slipping back. He followed my gaze, then muttered under his breath, "We're leaving. Now." We slipped out the back door of the diner, moving quickly down the alley. My pulse hammered as Ethan guided me toward the car, his hand on my back firm, steady. But just as we reached the corner, a voice called out, "Going somewhere?" The man from the counter stepped into view, blocking our path. His jacket bulged at the hip gun, no doubt. His smile was cold, wrong. Ethan stepped in front of me instantly, his posture sharp, every inch of him ready for violence. "Stay behind me," he murmured. The man tilted his head, eyes narrowing on me. "Mrs. Carter. Or should I say Widow Carter now? We've been looking for you." My throat went dry. Ethan's hand hovered near his jacket pocket. "Walk away," he said evenly. The man chuckled, low and mocking. "Or what? You'll shoot me in broad daylight." For a second, no one moved. The world shrank to the three of us, the standoff taut as wire. Then Ethan lunged. The struggle was quick, brutal. A fist, a grunt, the metallic glint of a gun. I stumbled back, my hands trembling, unable to breathe as Ethan forced the man against the wall. The gun clattered to the ground, skidding across the pavement. "Run!" Ethan shouted, but my legs wouldn't move. Not until Ethan slammed his fist into the man's jaw, knocking him out cold. Then he grabbed my wrist, dragging me toward the car. We sped out of town, the road stretching empty before us, silence thick inside the car. Finally, I whispered, "You could have killed him." Ethan's jaw was hard, his knuckles raw where he'd hit the man. "I would have if it meant keeping you alive." His voice shook with a ferocity that scared me, yet some twisted part of me felt safer because of it. That night, we found shelter in another nameless motel. The adrenaline had drained me, leaving only exhaustion and a gnawing fear that wouldn't let go. Ethan washed his hands in the sink, the water running red for a moment before clearing. He looked at me in the mirror, his reflection fractured by the cracked glass. "You okay?" he asked softly. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to be strong, but the truth clawed its way out instead. "I don't know how to do this anymore. I don't know who I am without him. And now I don't even know who he really was." Ethan dried his hands slowly, then crossed the room. He crouched in front of me where I sat on the bed, his eyes steady, grounding me. "You're someone worth saving," he said firmly. "With or without him. Don't let his secrets make you forget that." His words cracked something inside me. Before I could stop myself, tears blurred my vision, hot and relentless. Ethan reached up, his thumb brushing one away. The touch was gentle, reverent, like he was afraid I'd shatter under his hand. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't afraid of being hunted. I was afraid of what would happen if I let myself lean into him. Because once I did, there'd be no turning back. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of running, hiding, and breathing in fragments. Each town felt the same. Shadows at every corner, faces that lingered too long, the weight of eyes I couldn't see but felt pressing down on me. But through it all, Ethan never wavered. He drove when I couldn't keep my eyes open, stayed awake when exhaustion consumed me, and guarded me like I was worth guarding. One night, parked beneath an endless stretch of stars in the desert, I finally asked the question I'd been too afraid to speak. "What if we don't make it?" Ethan leaned back against the hood of the car, his eyes on the sky. "Then at least we tried. Together." I turned my head, watching him in the silver light. His profile was strong, steady, but his voice carried something fragile. "Why me?" I whispered. "Why risk everything for me?" He looked at me then, really looked, and his answer was so simple it broke me. "Because I love you, and because even if you never love me back, I'd rather die by your side than live knowing I didn't try." The desert air felt electric, charged with everything we couldn't say. My chest ached with grief, with longing, with the terrifying possibility of a future I hadn't dared to imagine. And for the first time, I let my hand rest on his, not as a mistake, not as a slip but as a choice. The air in the courtroom had changed thick, charged, like the moment before thunder cracks across the sky. For hours, the defense had peeled back the layers of the case, exposing the contradictions in the officers' testimonies, showing every inconsistency as if pulling rotten boards from a crumbling house. Still, the weight of the badge lingered heavy in the room, as if the jury hesitated to believe that men sworn to protect had so brazenly lied. Then came the security footage. The video flickered onto the screen, grainy black and white, but undeniable. Officer Daniel's hand slipped into his jacket, fingers curling around a small plastic bag. He glanced around, unaware of the silent watcher on the ceiling. Then there it was. He bent, quick, casual, sliding the bag under the librarian's chair before snapping upright. The entire courtroom leaned forward. The jury watched, stone-faced, but their eyes sharpened. The prosecutor's knuckles whitened on the table. And at the defense bench, Elijah sat frozen, his breath shallow, his pulse a hammer in his ears. For months, he had carried the weight of shame, whispers, stares in the street, his name slandered in the papers. And here it was, proof naked, undeniable. Gasps rippled when the footage ended. Silence clung like smoke until Judge Ramirez cleared her throat. The record will reflect that the video has been admitted into evidence. The jury will disregard prior testimony that conflicts with what they have just seen. The prosecutor tried to salvage ground, sputtering objections, but their voice faltered against the raw clarity of the tape. The gavel came down once, sharp, final. And then the murmuring began. From the gallery, from the rows where neighbors, strangers, churchgoers, and fellow librarians sat shoulder to shoulder. People who had watched Elijah walk through months of humiliation, who had watched news vans swarm his block like vultures. Now they watched truth shine through, and their voices trembled with awe. One by one, they rose to their feet. The first was a teenager Elijah had once helped with a research project, her hands trembling as she clapped, eyes wet. Then came an older man who had always sat in the back pew at church. Then mothers, fathers, students, neighbors. Applause swelled, ragged at first, then thunderous, filling the courtroom until the very walls seemed to shake. Elijah's throat closed. He had imagined this moment countless times in the quiet of the library stacks, when despair gnawed at him, when whispers hissed behind him in grocery store aisles. But reality, this tidal wave of voices, hands clapping, feet stamping, was too much. Tears blurred his vision. His body felt light, as if every ounce of weight had been lifted all at once. The judge's gavel banged again. Order! Order in the court! But her voice was not harsh. It carried something softer, recognition that this eruption was not mere disruption. It was relief, justice finding its voice at last. Elijah pressed a shaking hand to his chest. For the first time in a year, he let himself breathe. The verdict came swiftly. Not guilty. The jury foreperson spoke the words with clarity, but Elijah barely heard them. His ears still rang with the applause, with the sound of his name whispered in relief by people who had doubted him. He sagged in his chair, overwhelmed, while his attorney clasped his hand. Outside, the courthouse steps became a sea of cameras and microphones. But this time, Elijah did not bow his head. He stood tall, his voice steady. I was never the criminal, he said. I was the librarian. I am the librarian. And I will always be the librarian who believes in truth. Behind him, the city listened, some ashamed, some vindicated, some realizing for the first time how fragile justice could be. The officers who had framed him were led away, faces pale, stripped of the arrogance that once gleamed in their uniforms. Their badges no longer shields, their lies no longer armor. And Elijah walked free. But freedom was not just walking out of a courthouse. It was the day he returned to the library. The sun slanted through tall glass windows, dust motes swirling in golden shafts. For months, those doors had remained closed to him. Now they opened with a soft creak, and he stepped inside, the smell of paper and ink and polished wood washing over him like home. He paused at the front desk, running his hand across the familiar worn edge. His reflection stared back faintly from the glass display. Casey, a man older, lines deeper, but eyes clearer. The staff gathered, some tearful, some smiling wide. And then came the children, those he had once read stories to, who had once sat cross-legged at his feet, entranced by fairy tales and histories. They rushed forward, wrapping their arms around his waist, their laughter piercing through the remnants of pain. He knelt, hugging them back, the scent of crayons and notebooks filling his senses. This was what they had tried to steal from him. This was what they had failed to take. In the weeks that followed, Elijah's story spread. not as scandal but as testimony. Churches spoke his name in sermons. Newspapers ran headlines not of his supposed guilt, but of his proven innocence. His face appeared on talk shows, where he spoke quietly, firmly, about the cost of false accusations, about the fragility of trust between community and police. And Ulwish returned to the library. He walked the aisles, shelved books, helped students with essays, recommended novels to curious readers. At first, whispers still trailed him. But slowly, whispers became greetings. Greetings became laughter. And laughter became warmth again. He was not naive. He knew scars remained not just in him, but in the community that had watched him fall. But he also knew that scars, though they never vanished, could remind people where healing had begun. Months later, on an ordinary Tuesday, he stood in the reading room. The clock ticked softly on the wall, and rows of students hunched over notebooks, pens scratching. A girl raised her hand. "Mr. Elijah," she said, eyes wide with curiosity. "Why do you still work here after everything? Aren't you mad?" The room quieted. Dozens of eyes turned to him, waiting. Elijah smiled. Not the brittle smile of survival, but the deep, gentle smile of a man who had walked through fire and found himself whole on the other side. "Because," he said, "this place is more than shelves of books. It's a place where truth lives. And truth," he paused, laying his hand on the desk, "always deserves a guardian." The room exhaled, a hush of understanding. And as Elijah returned to his work, sunlight poured across the pages, golden, unwavering, like a promise that justice, though fragile, could still triumph so long as someone kept watch. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.